I think the biggest story here, I've been really excited to report this,
Okay.
is the PCR testing.
Right.
There's been a lot of issues with this. Even Tony Fauci came out and said anything over 35 cycles with this PCR testing is not too accurate.
And we covered
Um,
this. We did a whole breakdown of how the cycles work, how the 45 cycles has the ability to be up to 100% false positives, which is
yeah.
unbelievable that they're using this diagnostic tool this way. We laid it all out, but there's sort of a new breaking story. It's no longer a problem that Highwire is pointing out, is it?
No, and how did we get here? Why are we even using this test? So in January, a German virologist named Christian Drosten, he created a new laboratory assay to detect the coronavirus from the German Center for Infection Research, and he put out the WHO quickly picked up that guideline, and the Euro surveillance also published that in their journal. It's a infectious disease epidemiology journal, and it's called Detection of 2019 Novel Coronavirus by Real-Time RT-PCR, and that was in January, and that
So
became the
he's basically the
standard.
guy that there's always been PCR tests, but he isolated the part that could detect the coronavirus for COVID-19 that could be used in a PCR test and say, hey, we're ready to go. We can start testing everybody.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and a lot of people had an issue with that. They took to Twitter. A guy named Walter Akima went on Twitter and really questioned why the heck that thing was rushed so fast. He basically said, of all the publications, no research paper got reviewed and accepted in less than 20 days. One got accepted in less than 24 hours after submission, and that was the Drosten paper. It's come to be known as the Drosten
Wow.
Review. So. Now, the breaking news on this is this paper is being contested, as is and by extension, so is this new assay PCR test that is being used, and that's the PCR test that's being used really everywhere throughout the
This
world.
is what's
These
driving the
rapid,
lockdown, right? I just saw, California, you're not allowed out of your house. You can't get in a car. You can't get on a bicycle. You can't do anything because the PCR tests are showing that there's this dramatic increase in cases. We've talked about this. If coronavirus truly is a deadly disease, when cases go up, what should you see? You should be saying deaths go up, ICU going up. Not happening. Deaths are not going up. They're still flatlined. This whole thing is a giant fake out, or at least it appears to me. But let's get back to the PCR tests that are driving the insanity around cases and the case-demic. So continue on.
yeah, so the PCR is being contested by 22. These are credible health professionals. They've done an external peer review because they're basically stating the first one was not peer reviewed. They sent it to Euro Surveillance Editorial Board asking for a retraction. What they did was looked at all components of the test design. The protocol recommendations were assessed. They looked at the parameters and they examined those against relevant scientific literature. And now this is a deep dive, so I recommend anybody go into this, but I took some segments from it, and let's just read a couple here just to give you an idea what these tests, some of the issues with this test. So, and there's 10 of them. There's 10 major errors in there. I just
Okay,
took a couple out.
great.
Number 3, the test cannot discriminate between the whole virus and viral fragments. Number 6, the PCR product have not been validated at the molecular level. Number 7, the
Whoa.
PCR test contains neither a unique positive control to evaluate its specificity for SARS-CoV-2, nor a negative control to exclude the presence of other coronaviruses. Number 8, the test design in the Corman-Drosten paper is so vague and flawed that one can go in dozens of different directions. Nothing is standardized, and there is no standard operating procedure. And number 10, we find severe conflicts of interest for at least 4 authors, in addition to the fact that 2 of the authors of the Corman-Drosten paper, Christian Drosten and Chantal Ruskin, are members of the editorial board of Euro Surveillance, which may explain why it was peer-reviewed so quickly or put in that journal so quickly. Now, this is something that's very interesting, and it speaks to the cycling. And this is directly from the paper. We've talked about the cycling. They go right in. This is probably the most concise description I've ever seen. And they say about the cycling, if someone is tested by PCR as positive when a threshold of 35 cycles or higher is used, as is the case in most laboratories in Europe and the US, the probability that said person is actually infected is less than 3%. The
Whoa.
probability that said result is false positive is 97%.
My God. oh, we're destroying the world with this test, and it's 97% inaccurate. Did you hear that, folks? This is not me. This is not somebody, a reporter out there. This is a pretty large group of scientists involved in this too, right? Authors on
Absolutely.
this rebuke of the PCR test.
Yeah, there's 22, and these are not
22.
run-of-the-mill scientists. These are researchers. These are world-renowned doctors and academics, people that have held positions in pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer. Now, let's look at the conclusion of this paper. I know it's a long segment, but it's so important. So they say, in light of our re-examination of the test protocol to identify SARS-CoV-2 described in the Corman-Drosten paper, we have identified concerning errors and inherent fallacies which render the SARS-CoV-2 PCR test useless. If there's a headline, that's it right there. And finally, they say a decision to recognize the errors apparent in the Corman-Drosten paper has the benefit to greatly minimize human costs and suffering going forward. Is it not in the best interest of Eurosurveillance to retract this paper? Our conclusion is clear. In the face of all the tremendous PCR protocol design flaws and errors described here, we conclude there is not much of a choice left in the framework of scientific integrity and responsibility.
Boom. Wow, Jeffrey, that's gigantic. That's gigantic. Right. We have, and this really is behind this entire pandemic. Without the false positives of this PCR test, none of this story adds up. I mean, I feel like every single week we bring another explosive bombshell. I've got another one coming up in just a few minutes here. Folks, look at this. The scientists are telling you, you are being lied to. They are using the worst diagnostic tool in the history of science, really, to drive a pandemic that does not even appear to be real because it's 97% false positives. Wow, that's huge, Jeffrey. You know,
let's give Christian Drosten the last word here.
Okay,
that's
please.
A bombshell. It's hard to really report past that. But since he's not here to talk, we'll look at an old interview that resurfaced. This is from 2014, so that's almost 7 years out now. Drosten considered PCR tests to be unsuitable. Holy moly. So It says, when MERS cases surfaced in Saudi Arabia in 2014, the authorities there decided to use the highly sensitive method of polymerase chain reaction PCR for testing. Drosten said, quote, "The method is so sensitive that it can detect a single genetic molecule of the virus. If, for example, such a pathogen flits over the nasal mucous membrane of a nurse for a day without becoming ill or noticing symptoms, then it suddenly becomes a MERS case. Where previously terminally ill were reported, now suddenly mild cases in people who are actually very healthy are included in the reporting statistics." And he goes on to say, in addition, Drosten sharply criticized the media. He considered the pandemic surrounding MERS to be largely media-made. He says, quote, "In addition, the local media boiled the matter up incredibly high. In the region, there is hardly any other topic in the TV news and daily newspapers. And in conclusion, medicine is not free from fashion waves. In that time, the WHO recommended that only those cases be reported as sick where an antibody test was carried out was positive." Drosten agreed with this opinion.
So he knew. He knew that this would drive false positives. It would drive a panic and a narrative, and the media would use it. But this time, instead of being against it, he celebrated it and gave us this crappy, world-renowned pile of steaming you-know-what to drive a pandemic, the worst diagnostic tool maybe we will ever look at when we look at this in our review mirror in history. If you like that clip, then be sure to check out our live broadcast of The High Wire every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. You can watch it on Facebook, YouTube, iTunes, and Twitter. We'll see you there.